The courtroom was filled with quiet tension, the kind that hangs heavy in the air before a life-changing announcement. Trinity Poague stood before the judge, her hands folded tightly in front of her, her eyes fixed straight ahead, betraying nothing at first. Around her, jurors sat motionless, their expressions measured, while family members and onlookers waited in uneasy anticipation. Then the first verdict was read, not guilty. Relief swept across her features almost imperceptibly at first. Her shoulders loosened, her lips trembled, and tears began to gather in the corners of her eyes. For a fleeting moment, it seemed as though she allowed herself to believe the nightmare might be over. Maybe, just maybe, the consequences she had been facing for months could be less severe than anyone had imagined. But that brief moment of relief was immediately replaced by an unfamiliar weight. The subsequent verdicts were read, one after another. Guilty on multiple serious counts, including the death of an 18-month-old child in a college dorm room. The room seemed to hold its breath as the words sank in. The expression that had softened with hope hardened almost instantly. The tears that had signaled relief vanished. Her face became rigid, her eyes distant, her posture stiff. What had begun as fleeting joy now transformed into the slow, heavy realization that her life had changed irrevocably. It was a stark contrast. The shift from elation to the recognition of consequence. Observers could not help but notice the human complexity of that moment. Here was a young woman, known publicly as a beauty queen and a college student, confronted with the reality of her actions laid bare in the most public and final way possible. The courtroom, which had been silent in anticipation, now carried the echoes of disbelief, sorrow, and the hard clarity of accountability. This moment did not exist in isolation. It was the culmination of months of secrecy, decisions made in private, and events that had gone unnoticed until tragedy forced them into the open. What had begun as an ordinary life, filled with routine classes, friends, and ambition, intersected with a series of choices that ultimately led to a courtroom filled with witnesses, lawyers, and the undeniable weight of evidence. And so, the question lingers, how did it come to this? How could a life that appeared so ordinary, so carefully managed, arrive at a point where hope and despair existed only moments apart? What does justice look like when personal image and public perception collide with the harsh reality of a child's death? From the moment news of the case broke, Trinity Poague's story captured attention far beyond the small communities where the events had occurred. Headlines circulated quickly, painting snapshots of a beauty queen, a college student, and a mother, juxtaposed against the tragic death of an 18-month-old child. The contrast between her public image and the severity of the charges made the story both shocking and compelling to a national audience. But as the story spread, so too did misunderstandings. Social media clips of courtroom reactions, snippets of testimony, and viral commentary often simplified or misrepresented the events. Some viewers focused only on the dramatic moments, the brief relief on her face when she heard not guilty, or the shift to shock and despair as additional verdicts were read. These moments, shared out of context, shaped public perception, sometimes in ways that obscured the legal realities of the case. In reality, the courtroom and the legal process tell a far more nuanced story. Charges had been carefully considered. Evidence was meticulously examined. Witnesses testified. Forensic findings were presented. And yet, the speed and brevity of online videos made it easy for viewers to misunderstand the sequence of events or the nature of the charges. Many reactions reflected the tension between what people wanted to believe and what the evidence actually showed. This case matters because it highlights that tension. It reminds us that justice is rarely about instant clarity. It is about thorough examination, legal procedures, and weighing complex human actions against law and evidence. The attention it drew, both online and offline, underscores how the intersection of tragedy, public figures, and social media can amplify both curiosity and misconception. As we guide you through this documentary, our goal is to separate perception from reality. Everything you will see and hear is grounded in court records, verified evidence, and documented testimony. No speculation. No sensationalism. Only the sequence of events and the human factors involved. And as we examine these details, consider subscribing to the channel to follow the full story as it unfolds. We'll bring you every piece of evidence, every courtroom moment, and every aspect of the case so you can understand it fully, not just through viral clips or hearsay. Staying subscribed will ensure you don't miss the key moments that reveal the full scope of the events leading to the verdict. To understand how Trinity Poague's life arrived at that courtroom, it is necessary to look back, to the years before the headlines, before the investigation, before the verdicts. Trinity Poague was born and raised in Donaldsonville, Louisiana, a community that would come to recognize her as both ambitious and charismatic. From an early age she was active, engaging and determined to excel in every environment she entered. Family members and acquaintances would later describe her as polite and driven, someone who took pride in her appearance and her accomplishments. Her involvement in beauty pageants played a significant role in shaping her public image. Trinity participated in local competitions, ultimately earning recognition as Miss Donaldsonville. Within the community she was often seen as confident, poised and admired for her charm. Pageantry brought her not only accolades but also visibility, a platform that amplified both admiration and expectations. To outsiders she appeared as someone who had ambition, grace and the world seemingly at her fingertips. Alongside her pageant activities, Trinity pursued higher education with diligence. She enrolled at Louisiana State University, balancing her studies with social obligations and campus life. Peers described her as outgoing, intelligent, and socially adept. She maintained an image of success and normalcy, the bright student, the accomplished pageant winner, the young woman with a promising future. Yet, as often happens, public perception told only part of the story. Beneath the surface, few knew of the personal struggles she navigated, the choices she kept private, or the circumstances that would eventually lead to tragedy. The contrast between her carefully curated public persona and the private reality she faced underscores one of the central tensions in this case: how appearances can mask unseen complexities, and how public admiration can obscure actions behind closed doors. Understanding her background is not an attempt to excuse the events that followed, but to provide context. It is a reminder that cases like this involve people with layered lives, individuals whose decisions and actions cannot be fully understood without seeing both the public and private dimensions. This duality, between image and reality, is a thread that will reappear throughout the events we will examine, from the hidden pregnancy to the courtroom itself. Beneath the public persona that Trinity Poague presented, a hidden reality was unfolding, one that would become central to the legal proceedings. The pregnancy she carried remained largely concealed until the final weeks, a fact that would later dominate both media coverage and courtroom discussion. Based on timelines established through medical records and witness testimony, the pregnancy had progressed for several months without the awareness of many close to her. Friends and acquaintances described no obvious signs, noting that she maintained her usual routines and appearances. Campus staff and fellow students too reported being unaware. The concealment was effective enough that the eventual discovery of the pregnancy came as a shock to those around her. Medical experts testified during the trial about the complexities of late-term pregnancies, particularly in individuals who may take deliberate steps to hide physical changes. These professionals explained that certain physiological and behavioral factors can contribute to maintaining a seemingly normal appearance, especially when clothing choices, posture, and daily activity are carefully managed. In Trinity's case, evidence suggested that these factors, combined with personal decisions, played a role in keeping the pregnancy largely private. Who knew of the pregnancy, and when, became a crucial question in the investigation. Family members indicated that only a few individuals were aware, and even then details were limited. Peers and campus authorities had no prior knowledge. This selective awareness created a situation where the child's vulnerability was compounded by the secrecy surrounding the pregnancy. Psychologists and legal experts noted that secrecy in similar cases often stems from multiple pressures: fear of social judgment, anxiety about personal goals, and concern for reputation. In high-profile environments such as collegiate campuses or public competitions, these pressures can be magnified. While these factors do not excuse harmful outcomes, they provide context for understanding the behavior that led to the tragic events. During the trial, both the prosecution and defense addressed this concealed pregnancy, though from very different perspectives. The prosecution argued that the concealment and lack of preparation demonstrated negligence and a failure to protect the child, framing it as a series of deliberate choices with severe consequences. The defense acknowledged the pregnancy but emphasized that there were complexities, emotional, psychological, and social, that influenced decisions, suggesting that intent and awareness were not as straightforward as they might appear. Ultimately, the hidden pregnancy became more than a background detail. It was a lens through which the jury and later the public evaluated the actions and responsibility of Trinity Poague. It highlighted the tension between private knowledge and public expectation, and it would become a pivotal factor in understanding how the tragedy occurred and how accountability was determined. The events that led to the tragedy unfolded quietly, almost invisibly, in a college dorm room. On the day the child was found unresponsive, investigators pieced together a timeline using multiple sources: text messages, phone records, witness accounts, and forensic analysis. Each detail would later be examined under the scrutiny of the courtroom, as every minute became a potential clue to what had occurred. According to reports, the dorm room was where the majority of interactions took place. Evidence showed that the child was left under adult supervision for periods of time, though the exact circumstances of those moments remain partially unclear. Investigators relied on messages sent and received during the day, establishing windows of activity and communication that helped reconstruct the sequence of events. Forensic evidence played a critical role in the reconstruction. Medical examiners analyzed the condition of the child and environmental factors within the dorm room. Their findings helped define the timeline of distress, offering insight into when the child had begun to experience critical medical complications. This information became essential in understanding how the situation escalated and what opportunities existed to intervene. Despite the clarity some evidence provided, gaps remained. Certain moments could not be fully verified, leaving questions about the exact circumstances of supervision and response. These uncertainties would later be addressed in court, with expert witnesses presenting interpretations grounded in both medical knowledge and legal standards. The emergency response, though swift once called, could not reverse the outcome. First responders arrived to find the child unresponsive, and efforts to revive him were unsuccessful. The immediate aftermath marked the start of a complex investigation that would examine not only the tragic result but also the actions, decisions, and behaviors that led to it. This day, seemingly ordinary at first glance, became the pivotal point in the case, the moment when private choices collided with irreversible consequences. The reconstruction of these events, informed by evidence rather than speculation, is essential for understanding the gravity of the situation and the legal findings that would follow. As we move forward in this story, each detail, each decision, and each piece of evidence will be examined. The sequence of events is not just a record of time, but a roadmap that illustrates the unfolding of a tragedy that would captivate the nation. Once the child was found unresponsive, law enforcement moved swiftly. Officers secured the dorm room, preserving the scene and ensuring that all potential evidence was documented. Each corner, each item, and every interaction within the room was carefully recorded. Investigators conducted interviews with anyone who might have had knowledge of the child's care or the events leading up to the incident. The goal was clear: establish an accurate, chronological understanding of what had transpired. Medical examiners were called to evaluate the child, providing essential insight into the circumstances surrounding his death. Through careful examination, they were able to determine that the child had suffered trauma consistent with prolonged neglect and physical harm. Importantly, their findings were presented without embellishment. A professional assessment focused on the physiological evidence rather than speculation about intent or character. The autopsy confirmed critical aspects of the case. While it avoided graphic sensationalism, the report detailed the injuries and medical conditions that contributed to the child's death. Forensic analysis established the timeline of the physical trauma and helped investigators understand the progression of events leading to the fatal outcome. Experts were able to define both the cause and manner of death with clarity. The cause encompassed the immediate physical conditions that resulted in loss of life, while the manner of death, determined to be homicide, reflected the legal and medical consensus regarding the circumstances in which the child had died. These findings formed the foundation for the charges that would later be filed, and they would play a central role during the trial. As the investigation progressed, several key turning points emerged. Witness statements contradicted initial accounts, and physical evidence revealed inconsistencies in timelines. Each new detail added layers of understanding, shaping a case that was far more complex than initial reports had suggested. Investigators were not simply building a file, they were assembling a coherent narrative from fragments of behavior, communication, and forensic analysis. The diligence of law enforcement and medical experts ensured that the subsequent trial would rest on facts rather than assumption. Every record, every detail, and every testimony was preserved for scrutiny in court. This stage of the investigation demonstrates how meticulous work, grounded in evidence and expert analysis, lays the groundwork for the judicial process that follows. Understanding these early investigative steps is essential for appreciating how the legal system navigated a case marked by secrecy, complexity, and public attention. Each decision made during this phase, from securing the scene to interpreting medical findings, would influence not only the trial but also how the nation came to understand the tragedy and the accountability it demanded. After the investigation concluded, formal charges were brought against Trinity Poague. The case centered on allegations of negligent homicide and manslaughter. Negligent homicide applies when a death results from a failure to exercise reasonable care, showing disregard for foreseeable risks. Manslaughter refers to causing the death of another without premeditation, often involving reckless or negligent behavior. Prosecutors needed to show that her actions or inactions directly led to the death of an 18-month-old child, and that those actions reflected a level of negligence sufficient under the law. The defense sought to challenge these claims, emphasizing that intent and awareness could not be clearly established. This legal framework would guide the entire trial, framing both the evidence presented and the arguments made. The trial began with careful jury selection. Each juror was questioned to ensure impartiality and the ability to evaluate evidence fairly. The courtroom, filled with observers, staff, and family members, maintained a quiet intensity as the proceedings unfolded. The prosecution presented its case methodically. Physical evidence, medical records, and reconstructed timelines were examined. Expert witnesses explained the cause and manner of death, detailing how the child's injuries connected to the circumstances of care. Each point was presented clearly to allow the jury to understand the sequence of events. The defense responded by questioning interpretations of evidence and providing alternate explanations. Expert witnesses offered insights that highlighted uncertainties in timing and intent. Their goal was to demonstrate that reasonable doubt existed regarding criminal responsibility. Throughout the trial, the judge instructed the jury carefully. Jurors were reminded to consider all evidence critically, evaluate expert testimony, and focus solely on what was presented in the courtroom. Legal definitions were clarified, and the standards for conviction were explained as the trial progressed. Every testimony and piece of evidence contributed to a detailed picture of what had occurred. The courtroom became the space where facts, human behavior, and legal responsibility intersected, guiding the jury toward a final determination. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury reached a decision. Each charge was considered separately, with careful attention to the evidence and legal standards presented during the trial. Some charges resulted in acquittal. In these cases, the jury determined that the prosecution had not met the burden of proof. The evidence did not demonstrate beyond a reasonable doubt that Trinity Poague's actions satisfied all the elements required for conviction. These acquittals reflected the jury's careful adherence to legal standards, rather than any reflection on public opinion or the broader tragedy. Other charges resulted in conviction. The jury found that on these counts, the evidence clearly demonstrated negligent or reckless behavior that contributed directly to the child's death. Expert testimony, physical evidence, and timelines presented during the trial provided the necessary clarity for these determinations. Each conviction represented a legal judgment based strictly on the facts presented in the courtroom. Public reaction to the verdict was immediate and often confused. Many focused on viral clips of her initial relief, misinterpreting the acquittals as a full exoneration. It is important to understand that verdicts can vary across different charges. A defendant may be found not guilty on some counts while being convicted on others. The complexity of the legal system means that a single moment of emotion does not always reflect the full scope of the court's decision. By understanding these distinctions, viewers can see that the verdicts were not a matter of chance or perception, but the result of detailed, evidence-based deliberation. The jury's decision marked a significant turning point in the case, but it was only the beginning of the process, as sentencing would soon follow. Sentencing brought the courtroom into a tense, quiet focus. Victim impact statements were read, each one detailing the profound loss and grief experienced by family members. These statements were handled with care, ensuring respect for the emotional weight of their words while providing the jury and judge with a clear understanding of the human consequences of the events. The judge then outlined the reasoning behind the sentence. Each factor, from the severity of the charges to the circumstances surrounding the child's death, was considered carefully. Legal standards required balancing accountability with fairness, ensuring that the sentence reflected both the convictions and the broader context of the case. The explanation clarified the length of the sentence and its legal implications. Unlike the verdict, which determined guilt or innocence on specific charges, sentencing addressed the consequences of those convictions. It translated legal responsibility into defined terms, providing both a measure of justice and a framework for future oversight. The emotional moment that went viral, her initial reaction of relief followed by the recognition of the sentence, can now be understood in context. This shift did not indicate a lack of understanding or remorse. Instead, it reflected the human complexity of processing sudden, life-altering news in a public setting. Her visible response highlighted the weight of accountability and the immediate awareness of the consequences she would face. Sentencing marked the formal end of the trial phase, but it also served as a reminder of the broader lessons this case presents. The importance of due process, the distinction between perception and legal reality, and the profound impact of individual choices when they intersect with the lives of others. Once the verdict and sentencing were delivered, the story spread rapidly across social media. Short clips, often under a minute in length, highlighted dramatic moments. The fleeting relief, the shift to shock, the visible emotional response in the courtroom. These snippets circulated widely, shaping public perception long before full context could be understood. The reality, however, was far more complex. Court records, detailed evidence, and legal testimony provided a nuanced account of the events leading to the child's death. They showed the careful examination of timelines, medical findings, and human behavior that informed both the verdict and the sentencing. In contrast, social media narratives often oversimplified or misrepresented the case, focusing on emotion rather than fact. This phenomenon, trial by internet, illustrates a growing challenge in how cases are perceived today. Quick reactions, viral clips, and online commentary can distort understanding, influencing opinions without reflecting the full truth. For creators, journalists, and storytellers, this underscores a responsibility to present evidence accurately, to contextualize moments, and to avoid sensationalism that misleads viewers. True crime storytelling carries an ethical obligation to inform and explain, rather than exploit or provoke. By examining these dynamics, viewers can see the difference between public reaction and legal reality. The courtroom may be over, but the interpretation of events continues, and understanding requires attention to detail, context, and verified information rather than fleeting impressions. The case of Trinity Poague offers lessons that extend beyond the courtroom. It demonstrates the tension between image and accountability, how carefully curated appearances can obscure serious consequences. It highlights the ways youth, secrecy, and complex personal decisions can intersect with responsibility, sometimes with irreversible outcomes. It also illustrates the limits of public perception. Snapshots of emotion, brief clips, or selective reporting cannot fully convey the depth of a case, the weight of legal evidence, or the human factors at play. Understanding requires patience, context, and a commitment to follow the facts. This documentary was created to provide that understanding, to examine the events, the decisions, and the legal processes without exploitation or sensationalism. The goal is clarity, not judgment, insight, not spectacle.